everyone, it's Christina, and it feels great to be back in my series. It's been way too long, I got held up by too many things, and I'm really glad to be back. I'm going to be starting off by redoing the submission for someone who'd submitted previously, but because of the long delay, I didn't feel it was fair to give the same criticisms or let the criticism I put down stand, since by now they've improved very much, which I can clearly see by the pieces they've submitted. Now, I don't have an awful lot to say about these pieces because this person's improvement, and I really do mean it, is astronomical. I actually follow them on DeviantArt, and I've been watching their artwork for a very long time, and their improvement is just so fast. I can tell you that at their age, I was not that good, and I'm really, really excited to see where they go in the future. So the first piece that I'm going to be looking at is this one. Now, I'm really excited to see them really tackle environmental pieces, and while there is no exact room or place that this character is in, you can see that she tried to incorporate the background color with the foreground figure. Now, this is merely a preference of mine, but I feel that because the saturation in the entire piece is so strong that you really don't have a sense of focus in the piece. You have this really bright eye right here, and then you have the rest of the body, which is also really saturated, then you have the background that's really saturated as well. I feel that if you were to do something like take the whole piece and bring the saturation down a bit like this, and then you would take some brightness contrast and really go in there and do something like this where the focus is a little more, like it's less saturated but there's more focal light. And then go back here, bring the saturation down again just a little bit, right? Now I've duplicated the layers. This is the original version and this is my redo version. So then what I'd do after that would be to take this piece right here and just erase away at the top layer that I've desaturated to bring out the saturation from underneath. So that way we can bring back a little bit of the saturation in the eye, maybe a little bit in the face, a little bit in the hair. You know, just touches of color. Touches of color in a desaturated piece really draw in the eye to focus on, like, the most important things about the piece. When you have everything saturated, it's much harder to focus on what is individually important. Now, I can see here that he's carrying a firearm. Now, I would assume that this firearm has some sort of reflective quality because it's made of metal or some sort of plastic. So, to achieve that and to draw focus to what he's holding, because it's really easy to get lost and forget what he's holding. So what I would do would go in with like a spray brush and just lightly highlight that the weapon is there. The light from the eye, which is clearly glowing, would reflect on the weapon, which would draw more attention to it, but you need not define the whole weapon. Just something that I've been studying actually is the idea of giving enough detail so that the viewer can infer the rest of the image and not over detail it and crowd up the picture. That's a thing that animators achieve a lot. Animators are one of the few people, or some of the few people that really understand the concept of less is more. Animators are some of the best artists out there because they can actually create an entire image and use the most essential details and have what will appear to be an essentially detailed image, but it's not overcrowded with details, and it allows your mind to really complete the image without having to draw in every single thing. It's like how they can draw old people or people with scars or something, and they only use the most important lines to infer the details on the face, but then not overcrowd it with too many details. So here I've added a very light gradient effect, or at least light effect to the weapon, so you can infer that it's there, but then you don't actually have to put it there. Or like at least draw out all the details of the weapon, since this area is really well lit. Smaller nitpicks of mine would be little things like this. For example, here where this color kind of leaks on to the other color. I personally do my best to avoid little things like this. Understandably, it's not like a deal breaker for anything, because this actually is a really nice piece, and I'm actually having a little bit of a hard time finding things to talk about. But I would avoid little things like this, because little things like that can take away from the piece, so just avoid leakage and avoid overlaps. For example, here you drew a highlight in one stroke, and that highlight is overlapping on the shadow, so you could take this and just quickly fix that. And I understand that the style that I draw my pieces in is a rather clean style, and that there's like a there's like a certain appeal to a messier quality of work, but that's just my preference. Moving on to the second piece, which I definitely have a lot more to talk about. Oh, excuse me, that's my phone. I have more to talk about regarding this piece because this one has a problem that a lot of artists seem to have when they add backgrounds onto things like this. And this is something I see all the time with different people's pieces. What you notice here right away is that the background is conflicting with the foreground image. You'll notice that when I drop in my magic tool, it's actually grabbing some of the pieces because the colors are so similar. Now, in this case, this one is not the worst offender I've seen of this. I've seen different pieces where they've put a background on a foreground image, but because that image is almost the same color as the background they've chosen, it's really hard for them to really distinguish that. And like what you end up with is a really cluttered looking image. Now this image I do not believe is actually that cluttered. You could easily fix this by adding some brightness like this. Now I'm not going to leave it like this. What I'm doing is just I'm brightening up the image like this. And then what I'm going to do is go in and erase a little bit. That way we can bring out the light in the foreground. This one is one of those pieces where I have a really hard time talking about it because, well, one of the major criticisms I would normally give would be that this thing needs a more solid light source. This picture is popping off of the canvas and clearly is meant to be some sort of 3D effect where the piece is not exactly meant to sit on a canvas, but it's also meant to be popping out. So having a singular light source on this piece or having a strict light source would be more difficult because you don't have a strict background. What I'm doing here is I'm just giving the piece more contrast by adding in a more strong light source. Erasing away the light I just put in and leaving the dark. This way the figure stands out more from the background. And you can give night skies especially have a lot of gradients to them. If you go out, if you don't live in the city and you live out in the countryside, you can go outside at night and look up into the stars, and you can see how the sky has many different gradients of blues and lights, and how the sky is not just one solid black color. So you see that because I've taken this light and added it on, the figure is much more standing out from the background, and it doesn't seem quite as meshed with the back part that it used to have. Now, other thing that I'm going to do is again draw more focus to the foreground figure. And the way I'm going to do this is that I'm going to add an add glow layer, and I'm going to go in with my strong brush, and I'm going to go with a purple color since this color is going to be purple. Just add the smallest glints. Glints are something that I feel a lot of people overdo, but they're not a bad concept. Glints are actually really important because they add kind of like that little like glimmering effect, which really draws in the eye. One of the most important things when you're doing like a still life of a metallic or reflective object is those tiny glints at the end of the piece. And those little glints can mean a world of difference. Like the smallest little glint on a picture can change the whole image of the thing you're working on. Now I would remember that this object that I'm glinting up right now is not a reflective one. She's an organic figure. Even though she's a very odd organic figure because she's not natural, she still is organic. So the only kind of glints I would add would be the reflective quality of her fur, since fur kind of has like an oily quality to it, or at least most of the time. And I would assume that even though she's kind of like a mythical creature, she still has that in her. So I've added this. Now we don't want to fuzz it up, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the hard eraser, go in there, and erase back to take away some of that that glowing quality that I've given her. Like this. There we go. Sadly, I do not have the layered file. I could probably do a much better job if I had the layered file. There we go. So you can see that the glint I've added kind of brings out the figure from the foreground a bit more. Here we go. Now one last thing that I want to talk about regarding, well, a couple things actually. One thing is the hair. Now I've noticed you've taken on this style of shading hair, which is where you make like one broad shape of the hair and then define the hair with little brush strokes. Now, while you're on the right track, this is an incorrect way as it stands to finish hair. you're halfway through the process of making hair. You're on the right track, but there's a more effective way to do it. If you look at hair, you'll notice that hair is in layers. There are small shapes in your hair that make up bigger shapes. When you define every individual hair in someone's hair, what you're doing is you're not making it realistic. Realistically, hair clumps together and layers and folds over itself. So when you do hair on a figure and you do it by individually stroking out brush strokes like this, what you end up with is something that doesn't look like hair but more a bundle of ropes. Hair is much finer than that, so you have to fold it over like this. So what I'm going to be doing here is putting in some shadows to imply that the hair is folding in on itself. You've got the right idea because you see how easy it is for me to add in these shadows to imply flow. That's because you actually are drawing in the strokes in the right way. You just got to add that overall shadow to it to really give it that impression that the hair is folding over itself and that the hair is layered over itself. So there I've got the first tail, that's the tail done. Now I'm going to go over to the hair here. There are much better ways to draw hair and define it, which I'm going to go over in a moment, but I'm just going to be correcting this one, since this is the way you've taken up drawing hair, and I'll correct it so you can see what you can do in the future. The reason I said that the process you're using is unfinished is because normally when you draw hair, this is like the third step, but instead of taking it one step further and adding the overall shadow to imply that the hair is folding on over itself, you've instead taken to leaving it there. Now, the one thing that I would like to point out as to why this isn't an effective method is because it doesn't give the hair a flowing quality, and you have to resort to using things like glow dodge or add glow on like little glints of the hair to imply that it's a glossy hair, but it still doesn't quite resemble hair. And that's because you have to go back and add the shadow, which implies that the hair is folding over itself. Although, in general, I would recommend drawing out the hair instead of leaving it just a color, but using broad, simple shapes. So now that I've done this, right, what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to blend away to give that folded quality of the shadows a more softer texture, because again, hair has many gradients in it because the hair is naturally glossy, and you want to give that effect with what you're doing. Make it feel that it is flowy, glossy hair and not one stiff thing. So there's that. And again, you'll remember in a previous critique I did where I talked about the quality of shadows and color and how different colors on different things, even when you set it to something like multiply, can make all the difference with the quality of the image. So what I'm going to do here is I've used a dark red to shade this, but I'm going to test out and see if a different color would add a better quality to the hair. So I'm going to go with a darker violet, since that seems to work better than the dark red. And I'm going to brush out these pixely qualities and bring that down. Now, one step further that I'm going to take is I'm going to go multiply again, make this a darker violet, and go in and just add a little more soft gradients and not actually draw it in, just using the brush lightly to really define in that hair, like so. There we go. This really brings out the hair more and makes it feel more like a hair quality. Now again, I wouldn't recommend this method of drawing in little strokes to define the hair. The problem with this, like I mentioned before, is that it's not natural looking, and that to accomplish hair, there's actually a much easier step. To draw in hair, you begin by, okay, let's just draw in a simple head shape here. I'll show you, like so. Now let's say we're drawing someone with a full head of straight hair. So what you begin with is the hairline. Now you can observe your own hair or other people's hair so you can see how hair behaves. Hair is composed of tiny shapes that gradually make up a larger shape. Now you can see that everything stems from the hairline. People can have side hairlines, messy hairlines, or no hairline at all. For example, men, because their hairs are shorter usually, may have a spiral on their head instead of a hairline. Women grow a hairline because their hair is so much longer. Again, look at these shapes. I've created a full head of hair, but I've only done so with the simplest of shapes and smallest of strokes. It's usually more desirable in your pieces that you use as few strokes as possible and not overstroke or overline your work, especially your sketches, because then what happens is that you ended up with a dirty sketch, which can really clutter up your work. Now, when you're doing, let's say, curly hair, it's the same principle, only you break it into smaller shapes. Straight hair has less shapes in general because it doesn't have that broken up curly hair quality that curled hair does. But for curly hair in drawing, you have to break it up into smaller pieces. Now, what we're going to do is again start at the hairline. Now, because it's curly hair, I've noticed that curled hair usually starts at a side part, which is what we're going to go with today, right? Again, always remember where your hairline is. Hairline remembering is very important. Again, and just like the straight hair, it's all simple shapes. It's all simple and small shapes. The best thing to help you draw hair is just observing other people's hair. It's all around you, and you can see all different kinds of hair and see how those hairs behave. Play with your own hair. See how your hair bounces in your hand. See how it behaves when you twist it around your finger, when you run your fingers through it, when you shake it, when it falls over your head, when it's wet. Different things like that, and observing how your hair behaves can really distinguish and help you understand how hair works so you can draw it better. And again, even with hair, as complicated as it is, you want to use the most little bit of strokes that you can. Less strokes and able to accomplish it will still allow you to accomplish a more complicated image. Like I mentioned before with animators, drawing the most essential details and avoiding too many strokes is the best way to go about drawing. Because what you do is that you create a simple image which allows the viewer to infer the rest of the image with their mind, but doesn't clutter up the image. Now here you can see this curly hair and this long hair. Both are simple shapes. They're broken up into smaller shapes, and they create an overall larger shape. And then when you shade this, for example, you go in, right, and then you add an overall shadow quality. I've seen people shade their hair with like one gradient and then that's it, which is actually really fine, because you'll notice that most people's hair isn't as glossy as people draw it. It's always fun to draw glossy hair with lots of gradients and lots of shimmers, but here's the thing, most people's hair is actually pretty matte, because glossy hair usually implies greasy hair, and in real life when you see people's hair that's too greasy, it's usually dirty. So in real life, most people's hair is actually matte or just dry. So giving it only one gradient when you shade your hair is actually a really good idea, because it implies a more realistic hairstyle. Even when you're doing curls, you can go in and shade like that, and then go in with something a little more rough. It's difficult for me to explain how to shade or where to put your light source, because that's more of a case of observation. But again, I've uploaded a lot of speed paints, and there's probably one out there where I've done some hair of this kind, so you can look at those and really get a good idea of what I'm talking about. But coming back to this piece, the last thing that I would say, which is more of a small nitpick on my part, is these pixeled edges. This one specifically and these ones specifically. Over here they have a really nice watercolor property, but then this one stands out as really pixeled, and it takes away from the piece because I noticed it immediately. All you gotta do to fix that is go in with a blender. I'm using a watercolor blend, so I keep that watercolor quality that the other ones had, and just blend that pixeled edge away. There we go. And while that might seem like a little bit nitpicky on my part, the small things like a pixeled edge or a pixel out of place or a white dot on your piece, those things can really bring someone out of the illusion of this piece. And this is a really nice piece concept, because what it is someone flying in the night sky and the night sky coming out at them, and you use like a really nice water brush to go in and do this. So you don't want anything distracting from that. And there we go. So, to get a good idea of what I did, put this here. There's before and after. What I've done primarily is just make this figure stand out more from the background. I've blended away those pixeled edges, and I've fixed up the hair. You're on the right track, and I'm really proud of your improvement, and I cannot wait to see more of your work. And if you ever want to submit more stuff to me in the future, please do. Yeah, that's actually a side note to everyone. If you've ever submitted anything in the past to me and you'd like me to review some of your newer work, please do feel free to submit your stuff. And again, with the submission details I've mentioned before, don't trust Tumblr. Send me a link to your image as well as putting it in the Tumblr post. I'm so proud to see your progress. I really hope that you continue to progress. One last tip that I'll give you if you want to double check to see if your shading or if your light source or your shading is strong enough, something that you can do, which is a wonderful way to check, is bring the saturation all the way down and then see what you can make out of the piece. You'll see right away that because I've made this black and white and taken away all those colors, you can see there's a lot of mixing, or at least I visually mixing colors here, 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 and here. Like the colors keep overlapping because they're too close to each other. Now, let's do the same thing to this piece that I've taken right here. Now, this is the edited version that I've touched up. Let's grab this, right? Take this and bring the saturation all the way down. You'll see that more of the piece stands out and it doesn't feel as meshed in with the background as this one is. Now again, this is not a bad piece. I actually had a hard time finding legitimate, strong criticisms to give to both of these pieces because they're just that good, and I'm really, really proud of the progress you've made. But I feel that you can still progress in the future, and these are just the tips that I'm going to give you, and I hope that these are helpful for you. Thank you everybody for watching. I'm sorry if this episode is more slower paced than usual. I'm going to try and return to a more up-paced beat of video. A thought that I've had is that I shouldn't regard so much the time that I take with each piece and more regard the quality of what I'm saying. So depending on how people respond to that, I may take that instead of concerning myself so much with the time I take. Whatever I feel is best. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Please stay tuned for the next episode. If you want to submit your work to the series, the links are in the description, or if not, you can ask me. The links to my Tumblr are on my main page, and I hope this was helpful for everybody. Bye-bye.